All right, guys, I'm going to try and make this short and sweet. But what I would like to do is over the next few days, not the weekend, but Friday, Monday, and Tuesday, is I would like to give you just a little bit of more explicit test prep for the AP test this year. Now, explicit prep because based on the things we've been working on in your classes all year round, the writing and the analysis, you guys are by all intents and purposes, you're ready for this test. So, a brief little overview for those of you that were unaware. This year for the AP test, something that's different is you're only writing one free response essay, and that's what's going to be based your entire AP score on. In the past, there have been 3 free response questions. So if when we decide to go back, or if you on your own decide to go back and look at some examples just to give you an idea of what to expect, you're going to want to look for essays on past exams that are labeled question 2. Question 2 refers to what we call the prose essay. So in the prose essay, you're given about 250 to 500 words of a piece of prose, so a section of a novel or of a short story. And you're going to be asked a specific question that pertains to that story. So I wanted to start. I'm going to backtrack here a little bit, but first I thought it would be helpful for you just to see an example of what question 2 looks like. So this is the 2018 question. So most of the time you're going to be given the title and author of the work, and you'll be given some type of context to kind of frame what the passage is about. Now, I say it'll give you context. That context is only important to help you understand what it is that you will be reading. There is no expectation that you need to go look up this author or look up this short story or have any kind of experience with it. Everything that you are asked to do is possible with just what they give you on the test. So, in that passage. So, in looking at this one, the first sentence is actually the context for what the rest of the question is about. It says the following interchange, excerpted from an 1852 novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, occurs when 2 characters who have been living on the Blythedale farm, a community designed to promote an ideal of equality achieved through communal rural living, are about to part ways. So from this, I can now gather, all right, so I'm going to be asked something about these 2 people that are having some type of a conversation or maybe just like some kind of interaction with one another. I'm given their setting. They're on this Blythedale farm, which is something that is supposed to make them feel equal. And they're about to leave one another. So that sets up the context. All right, so the next 2 sentences that they give you, this is where it's actually going to focus and give you your task for the test. So read the passage carefully, and that's actually what we're going to go through in this little review section. And then it says, in a well-written essay, analyze how Hawthorne portrays the narrator's attitude towards Zenobia, who's a character, through the use of literary techniques. All right. So on the actual AP test, you've got 2 jobs. You're going to be given 45 minutes, and that is including being able to read and analyze the passage and also write about it. So do not kind of fall short or think that you need to have the majority of your time to write, because you want to have something good to write about. So reading the prompt ahead of time is always a good idea, just so you know specifically what you're being asked to do. In this one, like many of the prose questions, you're being asked about characterization or character relationships. This is specifically asking you to analyze how the narrator, that first person I, what is this person's attitude towards Zenobia? Okay, so usually they're not going to make it simple enough as you're going to say, oh, he loves her or he hates her or she hates her, right? But usually they're looking for some complexity. He loves her but knows that she has cruel intentions. She hates her but admires her quiet strength. So as you read it, you're looking for the dialogue and maybe even just some of the details included to see, how does this person, what is the point of view that they have towards this other individual, Zenobia? All right. So that's your goal. The second thing that this prompt tells us is at the very end. It asks you to explain or analyze through the use of literary techniques. Now, sometimes you're going to be given this very general stock statement. Sometimes they're going to throw you a bone. It might say, instead of literary techniques, through the use of diction, detail, and symbolism. right? So they'll give you a list sometimes. You're not limited to those, but when they give you literary techniques, one thing, because this year's test is open note, meaning you can have things written down or, other resources at your disposal. I would say give yourself a stock list of literary techniques so that you can kind of have that with you. And as you read, you can almost use that as your reminder. Oh, here's where I find some tone, there's dialogue, and you kind of have some things to grasp onto. So, I'll go over a little bit more about, how to write this essay and how to organize it next week when I post something on Monday, a little practice. But I just wanted you to be able to see this question because today I just want to kind of go back over the first part that you are being asked to do on this AP test, which is read the passage carefully. So, and kind of getting away from this, some of you that are in humanities, you might have seen this activity before, but this is one of my favorite activities for stressing close reading. So, if you decide to kind of humor me and go along with some of this practice this weekend, your job is going to be to look at two out of these three passages. You can even do just one if you want. And you're going to closely read and annotate, take some notes or give me some thoughts you have about the passage. And you're going to write me just one thesis statement. Now, for this activity, I don't give you a prompt, but we're going to say, and modeling it after the question that you're going to have to write about next week, I'm going to ask you to tell me something about the characterization. So with each of these prompts, or with each of these passages, excuse me, I would like you to read it carefully, all right, so that you can, going back to what Nabokov said at the beginning of the year in the essay we read, Good Readers and Good Writers, fondle the details. Notice and fondle the details. Don't read anything out. Kind of really open your eyes to not just, oh, this is a really boring passage, but what are some of the choices that the writer is making here? Okay, so you're going to note down some things and then you're going to write me just one sentence. So we will say, for all intents and purposes, we'll do the first one together, the one by William Faulkner. And if you choose to do the Hemingway or the Gertrude Stein examples, you can do one, you can do both. I'll give you 15 points per passage, and that'll be strictly extra credit. And I'll also give you some kind of feedback. Okay. So what I'm asking you to do, let me walk you through this real quick here. So the first thing we're going to look at is we've got our title and author, William Faulkner, from the Hamlet. All right. So reading the passage carefully. Now I'm going to show you kind of the cheat sheet to go along with this. As we read, but when I said you should have a list of some literary devices or literary techniques, that can be, here's my little list here with the little cat head icons: diction, use of detail, punctuation, syntax, imagery. Those of you that have been taking AP Lit with me, pretty much any topic of any of the skill packets that we've done, you can use those things, okay? So those are some things that you could use to talk about how the author develops the characterization, okay? All right, so getting back to the passage, if we look at it, first we'll just read it together. He was a man past middle age who, with nothing to start with but sound health and certain grim and puritanical affinity for abstinence and endurance, had made a fair farm out of a barren scrap of hill land, which he had bought at less than $1 an acre, and married and raised a family on it, and fed and clothed them all, and even educated them after a fashion, taught them at least hard work, so that as soon as they became big enough to resist him, boys and girls too, they left home. One was a professional nurse, one a prostitute, the oldest had simply vanished, so that there now remained the small and neat farm, which likewise had been worked to the point of mute and unflagging mutual hatred and resistance, but which could not leave him, and so far had not been able to eject him, but which possibly knew that it could and would outlast him, and his wife, who possibly had the same, perhaps not hope for resisting, but maybe staff and prop for bearing and enduring. So, those of you that have read Faulkner before, it's a pretty standard Faulkner passage. So, first two things that we always look at if we are given a passage and your mind goes blank, two things you can always talk about are, you can always talk about tone. I'm going to attempt to write it here. It's not going to work too well. Whatever. All right, so you can always talk about tone. The second thing you can always talk about is diction, because no matter what, when you string words together, word choice is diction, it's going to have a certain tone with it. So I'm just going to stop my little technology foray here, and we'll just leave that as a reminder. Okay, so if nothing else, if your mind goes blank, you say, I can't find any imagery here, I can't find any irony, I can't find any symbolism, Okay, well, two things you could use to talk about the characterization of the man that is being described here. You can talk about the tone of the passage and you can talk about the diction. So, first and foremost, try and wrap your brain around comprehending what specifically is being described. We know that in this passage, there's a description of a man, an older man, it seems, since he's past middle age. And the rest of the passage kind of talks about, at least in the first half, it's talking about his personal health, and then it's talking about his home, this setting that he's had, this barren scrap that he bought, and then he raised a family on it, and the family, seemed to do well enough, and that they survived, and then they left home, and now, even though the land had tried to eject him, and maybe his family had tried to eject him, he's still here hanging on. So we've got the portrait of a man. So for this first passage, just like the other two, we're going to try and use our annotations and our notes to figure out what's the characterization of this guy. What is this passage saying about this man? So, back to my little cheat sheet. If I was going to submit something for some extra credit, here's some things that I might note. Okay. Number one, if we say it with the tone, if you remember from my AP Lit class, we always say that when you're going to talk about tone, never just say in your thesis statement, the author, William Faulkner, uses tone and diction to describe the complex characterization of the farmer. All right. Why is that? Well, you need to throw on some adjectives. What kind of tone and what kind of diction? Okay. So for tone, my usual rule in class was always you can have two types. All right. The first type is complementary tones, meaning in this passage, was there a change? Did the tone start really positive and then become negative? I would say no. This is not a passage where it begins one way and then ends another. So we would have a complementary tone here, meaning give me two words that are synonyms for one another and list that as part of your thesis. All right. So some of the tone words I have picked out here: worn, monotonous, enduring, bitter, submissive. And those all come from just, kind of taking in, how do I think that the writer is describing this man? Well, worn because the land is worn out, he's past a certain age. Monotonous because nothing really happens that's any excitement in this passage. So I might say, in The Hamlet by William Faulkner, he uses a worn, monotonous tone to describe, the sad life of the middle-aged farmer. Okay, so that's one possibility. If the tone is not complementary, so for example, if it's not like this, it starts one way and ends another, or some other thing, we would say that those are contrasting tones. So you'd give me two antonyms, right? So it might be the tone is worn, yet also inspiring. Okay. But since that's not the case, we'll move on. All right, as far as diction, if nothing else, you know that the diction can either be positive or negative. So never just write down William Faulkner uses diction. If you can't think of any words and your mind goes blank, the rule is you say with negative diction, with positive diction. If you can get more specific, even better. So I would say in the passage that we just read, the diction has to do with maybe hatred, the family that left him all alone, the land that doesn't seem to like him. We would say the diction has to do with fertility and sterility. So there's a lot of words like abstinence, barren scrap, small farm that deal with the ability to produce or not to produce. We also have words that imply a lack, right? Being past a certain age, you're lacking maybe vitality, you're lacking life. He uses the word puritanical, which means, lacking expression or freedom. Less than $1, they're lacking wealth. And it says he taught them at least, meaning that there was a lack of things that they were also taught. There are some different words for resistance that are repeated, some synonyms. There are a lot of words that have to do with leaving, and there are a lot of words that have to do with enduring. So we could say just negative diction overall, or you could get a little bit more specific. You might choose to save some of the specifics for something you actually discuss if you were to write an essay on this. Okay, so continuing my annotations, some other things that I'm noticing, right? Notice that each of these little subjects by my little cat heads here, these are things that if the passage asks you for literary techniques, these are all things that I could use. So in the use of detail, well, the details we're given the fact that in the beginning they describe the man, he's past middle age, he has sound health. Then it tells us about his land. After his land, his family is described. So really, where he lives, who he lives with, what he's accomplished. All of those details are what is focused on here. We don't get anything about his personality, but it's all about kind of what he has or has not accomplished. So that's how I would kind of annotate the use of detail, the details that were given about this person. Punctuation. Sometimes punctuation might be something that stands out to you, sometimes not. In this particular passage, you might have noticed we have a lot of commas. There's only one period, and which will, if you bounce down to syntax, the entire passage is just one sentence. But commas are an indication of like lists. So something that's just being listed, meaning everything in the list has equal weight. It doesn't merit its own sentence. It's just a list. Like, and then it went on and on and on and on. In fact, the only place there's something different is a semicolon, and that's used within the parentheses. So maybe you find some meaning in that and you choose to write about it. Moving on, again, going back to syntax, the entire passage is one sentence. If we're being asked to characterize this man, we might say, it's interesting that his entire life can be summed up in one single sentence. That's depressing. So maybe he hasn't accomplished very much. As far as other literary techniques, you might go as far as to say symbolism. The farm, which started out barren and is now kind of lonely and it never really thrived, maybe that's a symbol for the man's life. He started out barren and alone and now is no longer thriving. Okay, so those are all options for things that you can pick out. Again, here's the list if you want to just kind of have it stock at hand of some different things. This is not a definitive list. You can have more things on here if you like as well. All right, so if you are doing this for extra credit and you're going to try and get your brain back used to close reading and really dissecting a passage, once you go through and kind of give me a list of what you noticed in your reading or an annotation, if you choose to print it out and actually just write on it too, that's fine. The next thing that I would ask you to do for your 15 points is to write a thesis statement. Now, these are not all perfect. Those of you that know me from class, some of these I would slash through and say it's too wordy. Some of these I would criticize and say, well, they don't have title and author and it's given to you. And if it's given to you, you use it. But the most important thing above all is that a thesis statement is arguable. So here are just some examples. And I'm just going to, while I read them, I'm going to add on title and author because it just bothers me. So in William Faulkner's The Hamnet, the sentence's monotonous, loveless droning echoes its subject's stubbornly mundane life. All right, so here I'm talking about tone and I'm talking about the structure of the passage echoes the stubbornly mundane life of the man. So there's my characterization. Not as direct as it could be, but it's arguable. All right, the second example. In William Faulkner's The Hamnet, the man's unyielding nature is developed through a single long sentence that builds without climax. The drawn-out clauses and irregular asides, those little, things that exist within the commas, create the experience of an arduous journey with no payoff in the end. So what kind of a journey has this man's life been? It's been very difficult and there's no payoff. So in other words, it's meaningless. Okay. A little wordy for my taste, but it's arguable. All right, the third one, the single prolonged sentence written by William Faulkner is used to show how the life of the barren farmer depletes in values as he approaches insignificant but inevitable death. All right, it works. And finally, the single drawn-out sentence from The Hamlet by William Faulkner portrays how blasé life can be, even after accomplishing goals, if you don't hold on to your loved ones and focus only on the mundane tasks of life. So this one has more of a literary analysis feel, like we've been working with theme. If it helps you to think about how does this man's characterization relay a theme? Sure, all of these will work. So what I would like you to do is to go through, if you so choose, and with the 2 remaining passages that are posted, the Hemingway passage and the Stein passage, give me some annotations of specific literary devices that help develop a characterization and give me a thesis. And if you choose to do this, I will give you feedback. If you just choose to listen to this and now you think you're better prepared for how to approach a question like this, how you would closely read this passage, well, then that's just great too. All right. Hope you guys have a good weekend.